Dean, extrasensory perception pervades modern consciousness. Most people really believe that it's true. Most scientists would be very dismissive and feeling it's irrelevant. I've had a lifelong passion about the field, not certain at all whether it's true, but certain that if it is true, it has a fundamental impact on our complete understanding of reality, humanity's understanding of reality.
About its potential for humanity, I'm not quite so sure. That's a difficult question, but for its importance for science is a lot easier. And it primarily is addressing psychology and the neurosciences. So the neurosciences have shown that the operations of the brain appear to give rise to consciousness, meaning conscious awareness, and to all of the cognitive processes that go on inside the brain. What ESP suggests is that that model may well be true, but it doesn't say much about how the information gets in the head in the first place. So in other words, if we make the assumption that all of the information coming into our heads comes through the sensory organs, then from that point on, once it's in the head, maybe neuroscience takes over and all the processing is pretty much the way it is. But if it's not true that all of the information comes in through the senses, then we've overlooked something potentially very important. So let's assume that it is true. So somehow we're able to perceive things that don't go through the senses, but we perceive it in some other way. One of the implications then is that what we think of as our self, with a small s, whatever's in there, is not completely in there, because I would be influenced by things which are outside my sensory apparatus. So that raises the possibility of something like a collective self.
So, but it all has to resonate ultimately in the brain. Is the issue how it gets into the brain, either through the normal sensory organs that we have, eye, ear, touch, smell, or through some other mechanism? Because ultimately, the only way it can make sense to us is if it resonates inside our brain.
Yeah, the primary mystery is a mystery of physics. It's the mystery of how information got from A to B and somehow not passing through the ordinary senses. Mm-hmm. That's really the issue.
And if such a thing were to be true, what are the implications of that for science?
Well, as I said, one possibility is that the self, as we usually think of it, is not a private, individualized, separate thing. It is distributed among lots of things. So collective mind is a possibility. Another possibility is that since the information in ESP also flows through time, apparently, then perhaps our models of the way that time flows is not completely correct when it comes up to the macro scale. So we know that at the level of fundamental physics, the time is symmetric, both in classical and quantum mechanics. Time can flow in either direction. So it's not so mysterious why time would behave in a strange way at that level, at an elementary level. But the mystery then is that if it also was occurring up at this level, the macro level, then how do we understand that? So that if it is true that in fact things like precognition are real, and I believe that the evidence is quite good, it says that we don't understand something fundamental yet about the passage of time.
So dealing with time, precognition, which is one of the categories of ESP, define what that is.
Precognition. So precognition is a form of perception, getting information from A to B, except A is at a different time. A might be, and presuming A is outside yourself and B is in here somewhere, A is either forward in time or backwards in time from where you think you are.
And particularly if it's forwards in time, no one today has knowledge of it. It's backwards in time, maybe you're getting a reading from someone else in some other way. So forward in time, that's much more serious.
Even backwards in time is serious depending on where the information comes from. Okay. If it's your own backwards in time, well, we call it memory.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody else's backwards in time...
But then it may be telepathy as opposed to...
There are a lot of other explanations that could come to play. It's true.
Right.
So the only one where there's a direct mystery, in a sense, is something from the future.
Okay.
And that in itself is interesting because then we don't know whether you're seeing a probable tendency for something in the future or the actual future itself.
So you've now categorized two remarkable worldview transformations. What is the nature of the self? And what is the flexibility in this thing we call time? Mm-hmm. So two radical approaches.
And then there's a third. The third is that we ordinarily think of being encapsulated in our body, in which case our intentions are translated into our actions internally, and they don't leak outside My intentions don't affect the world. And this is, again, part of the idea of being separate, an isolated object. If ESP is true, then one of the categories is psychokinesis, which is a mind-matter interaction, a direct interaction at a distance. If that data is true, then it suggests that the same act of intention that I wish to do this with my hand can be expressed out in the world in some way and affect virtually anything that you care to measure. Now, some things are easier to measure than others, but of the systems that have been measured, from random events to single-celled organisms to other human beings, it appears as though the same kind of intention that I use to make things happen in me can affect the outside world as well.
So in each of these categories, what might be an experimental indication that this is worth pursuing? The first one, where information may come to me that is not through my sense organs, and therefore my sense of self may be, I may have to expand my sense of self.
So the easiest one there is an experiment on telepathy. So again, we normally think that when we're by ourselves, that our thoughts are our own. With these experiments, you take two people, you isolate them from each other, so there's no ordinary way of communicating. You assign one of them a target picture, typically, and try to have them inject their mental image of the picture they're looking at into the other person's mentation. Mm-hmm. That means the person who's the receiver in this experiment is asked to speak aloud, anything that comes to mind. And what they speak aloud typically is taken by a one-way radio to the other person who's trying to transmit and trying to influence their thoughts. Mm. So it's kind of a biofeedback system of a weird type.
Trying to train the sender?
Trying to help the sender adjust their mental sending strategy so that the person says what they wish them to say.
Yes.
And if they do that, then there's evidence that somehow they're getting the information that the sender is sending. So this kind of experiment has been done a few thousand times, lots of labs around the world. Overall, the evidence is very, very clear, or at least statistically clear, that people do say more about what the sender is trying to get them to say than they would otherwise.
Let's go to the second one, precognition. What would an experiment be that would indicate that you're getting information from the future?
One type of precognition experiment that seems to show a robust effect is called presentiment, which is different than precognition. Cognition implies that you know what's about to happen. Presentiment is a feeling of something about to unfold. Mm-hmm. So in presentiment, you would ask somebody to sit down in front of a computer. They would press a button, the computer just waits 5 seconds, and meanwhile you're measuring some aspect of their physiology, like their skin conductance or their heart rate or something like that. And then the computer makes a random decision to show either an emotional or a calm picture, and it stays on the screen for a couple of seconds and then it goes away. So this whole trial might maybe 10 or 15 seconds, mm-hmm. and then the person repeats this. And each time there's a new random selection of a picture. So a presentiment effect would predict that if you can somehow see what your future contains, and it's a very emotional picture, that your body will begin to gear up because of the shock you're about to get. But if you're about to get a calm picture, then you would remain calm. So these experiments have been done. That's exactly what they show.
And the computer itself doesn't make the decision of which picture it chooses until after the biological reaction begins to occur.
Well, after the entire presentiment period, after the pre-stimulus period.
Okay,
yes.
Right.
That's right.
So you differentiate there a precognition from a so-called clairvoyant, that you sort of know what the computer's doing while it's doing it, because it hasn't. Right. While you're having the reaction, the computer you've programmed it that it hasn't made the random decision yet.
That's right. And in addition, these experiments are controlled for anticipation. So if you learned, for example, that every third picture was emotional, the game's over.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful that your random selections are indeed random, and that there's no ordinary way of anticipating what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then with this data, we can say three things. One, that the self would be enlarged. Two, our sense of time is extended. And three, that mind can control matter.
That's right. And there's another one that's so big I forgot it for a second. The really big question is, what happens when you die?
Oh, yes, that.
The reason why ESP is relevant to this is because if in fact information can get into your head from a distance, and especially if your intention can leak out in some way, it suggests that maybe you're not locked in there. And if you're not locked in there, well, where are you? So it raises the possibility that maybe when the physical body dies, that some aspect of consciousness might continue to live on.